Okay, good. So, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me to present to this committee. We are very honored at Gertie to be able to present our work. And I'd like to thank in particular Prof. Ned Hook, who suggested my name for this talk. So I'll very briefly present what we do at GARD-P, who we are, and also spend a bit more time on the STI program that we have launched already 2 years ago. I've been asked to, in particular, talk about the challenges and barriers within and outside our organization in the development of new drugs for STIs. But let me start with a short introduction on what GARD-P is. So GARD-P is a not-for-profit entity, a product development partnership. We are a Swiss foundation based in Geneva, and we operate mainly through partnership with public and private sectors to develop new drugs for infections that have become resistant to existing treatment. Our focus is on gram-negative bacterial infections, and we have launched a number of programs that address needs that have been identified by the international community as unmet medical needs. We work from any entry point in the development pipeline throughout to patient access. What is important to say is that not only do we have research and development program on new therapeutics, but we also have a great focus on ensuring access to those treatments for all patients wherever they live. This slide is a summary of our next business plan, who is due to be launched at the end of November, and which sets ambitious goals, i.e. to develop at least 5 new treatments for drug-resistant infections by 2025. Our vision is that all infections are treatable for everyone, everywhere. And our mission is to bring together public and private partners to collectively develop new treatments caused by drug-resistant bacterial infections. We have set also ambitious targets in terms of fundraising. So here we're talking about raising 500 million euros by 2025 to deliver these 5 new treatments. Our funders are mainly public funders and in particular governments. The programs that we have launched in the last couple of years are the following. So there are 2 programs addressing medical needs in children. There's a program addressing neonatal sepsis. The aim of this program is to develop an alternative first-line treatment for neonatal sepsis, and also a treatment for confirmed multi-drug resistant pathogen sepsis. We also have a pediatric program which looks into repurposing and optimizing the use of existing antibiotics, as well as accelerating the pediatric development of new antibiotics for children. We have a program called Exploratory and Discovery, which evaluates existing antibiotics as well as new ones, trying to recover drugs and combine old drugs as well as new chemical entities to tackle unmet medical needs, mainly pathogens that have been listed by the WHO as being priority pathogens. And we are about to launch a new program on serious bacterial infections. And finally, there's the sexually transmitted infection programs which I'm responsible for and which aims at accelerating the development of new antibiotics to treat STIs. This is an overview of our development pipeline, and as you see, there are different products in different stages of development. Some are at very early stage, have not even entered clinical development, while others are at phase 3 or registration stage. Just a word on access. As I mentioned earlier, GARD-P has embedded elements related to access in all those programs. And on this slide, you see it's conceptual slides on what are the pillars of access that are recognized by WHO and other entities. And the involvement of GARD-P in all those pillars can vary depending on the program. But one such pillar that is of relevance for the STI program is the one called Public Health Policy and Use. And that entails working on generating the evidence that is necessary for inclusion of new treatments into existing guidelines, working with diagnostic test developer to facilitate stewardship and conservation of new antibiotics, but also integration into guidelines, and working with other stakeholders such as the WHO to strengthen surveillance of resistance. For the STI program, we started by convening a group of international experts, and some of them were from the US. Those experts gathered to develop our target product profiles for the STI programs. And there are two of these TPP, target product profiles, one for the short term and one for the longer term. The short-term TPP focuses on developing a new drug for uncomplicated gonorrhea. It sets a target of 97% clinical efficacy at urogenital sites, so that's an ideal target, and a minimum target would be a 95% clinical efficacy. There's also a target related to the type of drug that we would be looking at, so a drug that can work against resistant strains, and in particular strains that are resistant to the current first line. The product should also have some activity against other pathogens. In vitro activity against chlamydia, in particular, is set as a minimum, and activity against mycoplasma is set as an ideal target. Of course, the drug must be safe, in particular in requiring little, if none, outpatient monitoring. Ideally, it should be safe to use in pregnancy and lactation. There should be no drug-drug interaction, or at least minimal drug-drug interaction. It should be a single-dose treatment in line with the current dogma, and we would like to have an oral drug, both as minimum and an ideal target. There's also a long-term target product profile, which has more ambitious targets and looks at a treatment that could be used ideally in the treatment of complicated infections. This long-term TPP also sets targets for the clinical efficacy of the treatment at extragenital sites. And here the targets are the same as the one for urogenital infections. So 95% efficacy at minimum and 97% as ideal. In terms of the mechanism of action, we would like to have a drug with a new mechanism of action, and of course, activity against resistant strains as previously in the short-term TPP. The other difference with the short-term TPP is that we have opened the possibility for a multi-dose treatment for this long-term target product profile. bearing in mind the difficulty in achieving the clinical efficacy target at extragenital sites, in particular with a single dose treatment. The first asset, the first drug that meets our short-term target product profile is a new antibiotic called zoliflodacin. It's a first-in-class drug that was originally developed by AstraZeneca and subsequently transferred to Entasis Therapeutics. This drug acts by inhibiting DNA biosynthesis and by a mechanism of action that is completely new and different from other inhibitors of the topo-2 enzyme. Zoliflodacin has been tested against a large variety of isolates, including XDR and MDR strains, and so far it has shown very high in vitro activity against all resistance backgrounds, so no cross-resistance so far. We have partnered with Entasis Therapeutics to develop this product, and Manos Peros will be talking a bit more about the partnership. But our aim is to develop zoliflodacin for uncomplicated gonorrhea and register it in a selected number of high-burden countries within the next 3 to 5 years. This slide summarizes the clinical trials that have been conducted so far. And as you see, there are 3 main partners in this development program. There's Entasis Therapeutics, there's NIAID, and there's GARD-P. So the trials have been sponsored either by AstraZeneca before Entasis took over the asset, or by NIAID or by ourselves. And we are currently at the stage where we launched the phase 3 trial. Some of you may have seen the press release that went out a few weeks ago. The partners that are involved in the development of zoliflodacin and with whom we are working very closely are the following. Of course, WHO is very much involved and has facilitated access to appropriate expert groups, but also our work in countries, in Thailand and South Africa in particular. We work very closely with the NDI, our sister organization, that supports us for a number of activities, and also with FIND, the Foundation for Innovative Diagnostics, who are aiming at developing new point-of-care tests for STIs. Entasis Therapeutics is, of course, our main pharmaceutical partner, and we are working very closely with them in the development of zoliflodacin. We also collaborate with the NIH and NIAID in particular, as they are also engaged in the clinical development of zoliflodacin. And then we have a number of clinics and trial sites that are part of our pivotal phase 3 trial, which are listed here. We also have phase 3 trial sites in South Africa and Thailand, and they are listed here, as well as the laboratories that are supporting the trial. And we also work very closely with the WHO Collaborating Center for STI in Örebro in Sweden for the preclinical activities. This is the slide, my last slide, and the one I'd like to spend a bit more time on is the challenges that we have encountered since we launched the development of zoliflodacin and the STI program at GARD-P. First and foremost is the gap between the regulatory requirements, the FDA guidelines for developing new drugs for uncomplicated gonorrhea, and the actual clinical use of gonorrhea drugs, which, as all of you know, is within the context of syndromic management and empiric treatment. So the first challenge relates to the standard of care and the fact that most patients with a gonorrhea infections receive today in the US and in many other countries 2 drugs, 2 antibiotics, one for gonorrhea and another one for chlamydia. You're probably aware of the debate around the usefulness of 2 drugs to mitigate the risk of resistance emergence in gonorrhea. It's an ongoing debate, and I don't think anyone has the answer as of today. But what the consequence of this syndromic management and the fact that most patients receive 2 drugs is that in our clinical development, we have to compare any new drug with 2 antibiotics. So it's not a head-to-head comparison with another drug, but rather a comparison with 2 drugs, and that proves difficult in many respects. The first is with respect to the non-inferiority margin that has been set by regulators, and that is very narrow. So any new treatment must not be inferior to the standard of care, this combination of antibiotics, by more than 10% in terms of clinical efficacy, and that's very difficult target, especially if you compare an oral drug with an injectable drug. Another challenge is related to the differentiation between reinfections and microbiological failures. So even though the test of cure visits in clinical trials of gonorrhea is very soon after the treatment has been administered, there's still a number of patients which will be reinfected, and we have no ways of differentiating those reinfections from true microbiological failures today. Those are all considered as failures. That's a very conservative way of looking at things, but this is how the regulatory guidelines are worded. And then finally, the necessity within the syndromic management to cover co-infecting pathogens, and the fact that even if we have a new drug that could have some activity against chlamydia or mycoplasma, it's a standalone development on its own. So gonorrhea development pathway is not does not buy time for chlamydia development pathway, and one would have to rerun trials and re-establish clinical efficacy through a complete development program for chlamydia and mycoplasma. The other challenge, and it relates more to our long-term TPP and what we plan to achieve in terms of public health and transmission and so on, is the necessity to cover extragenital infections, and in particular pharyngeal infections, with a single dose treatment dogma. The fact that we don't have any good PK/PD models to predict efficacy is also a major hurdle. It's difficult to achieve adequate exposure at those extragenital sites, even more so in the absence of good models of infections. Another challenge is the positioning of the drug and the consequences for access and stewardship. So any new drugs that would come out of the pipeline could be either positioned as a first line as part of the syndromic management, but it could also be positioned just to target resistant infections. And both of these extreme scenarios have pros and cons. On the one hand, we have the necessity to conserve these new antibiotics and to make sure that we have them in our drawer in case drug resistance reaches alarming levels. But on the other hand, the commercial viability of the drug needs to be ensured, and we cannot produce just a handful of treatments every year. It's very difficult to ensure the sustainability of manufacturing when resistance pops here and there from time to time. And then finally, there are operational challenges related to just running clinical trials on gonorrhea, the inclusion of women and adolescents in those trials, the difficulty in gathering PK data from patients who usually don't want to come back to the clinic to have additional blood drawn, the fragility of the pathogen and the necessity to be extremely careful between sample collection and culture, and then the different requirements and standard of care across countries. So in essence, that's what I wanted to present to you today. I would be happy to take questions, and I would like also to take the opportunity to thank our donors. So the German Federal Ministry of Health, the UK DHSC, South African Medical Research Council, who are supporting the STI program in particular. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Alirol. We will take one question from Niraj Sood, and then we're going to continue in the theme of drugs, and Dr. Perros, and then Dr. Barr, and Dr. Corte has kindly agreed to go last but not least on the point of care diagnostics agenda. So, Professor Sood.
Thank you for your presentation. My question is, when you're successful and you have a new drug, given that you have all these different partners, including a pharmaceutical firm, you're a nonprofit, NIH, how are the incentives going to be aligned in terms of pricing the drug or where it's placed, whether it's first line, second line? Do you have innovative models for thinking about not just kind of the innovation, but now post-innovation pricing and market access?
Yeah, thank you for your question. I'm not sure the answer is going to be short, but I'll try my best. So it's true that we're committed to make, the treatment that we develop accessible to all, and we are working with our pharmaceutical partner, Entasis, on that. In terms of the affordability, what I can tell you is that we are working on decreasing the manufacturing costs, and we have already been successful in bringing down successfully the cost of goods for zoliflodacin. At the same time, we have an agreement with Entasis that states that Entasis will retain the commercial rights in all high-income and low-middle income in high-income countries, whereas Gertie will have the commercial rights for low and middle-income countries. So the pricing discussion is going to be different according to these two territories, and I'll let probably Manos answer for the high-income countries. For the LMICs, we have already engaged with several stakeholders at country level to see whether there could be some support to make the drug accessible. We're also trying, as I said, to minimize the cost of production, and for sure, for our territories, we will minimize the benefit margin also for the suppliers.
Thank you ever so much. We really appreciate your joining us, and we know you're a little time constrained, so we're going to be liberating you to go into your Geneva evening. Thank you.